Hello, and welcome back to Homebrew. Today we're going to be looking back at Session 1 of the origin story of Emery, Taking Root. We're going to take a look at, essentially, what went right, what went wrong, and how do we plan for Session 2 of Taking Root. So there's a lot that went well in our last session. Coming from the start here, we had that Emery and Archik managed to pair up, which is really a good sign, seeing as if she didn't want to do anything with Archik, then there was really no plot lead to hook her into getting into the campaign that we had planned. Now, we still had a couple of things in our back pocket, being if she chose not to hang out with Archik, she could have gone back to her village, at which point she would have seen the problems going on there, and we would have been able to adapt and scramble from that. But luckily, not enough, we didn't have to worry about that. This also gave us a unique opportunity to get her involved with magic before she met up with the Nintonga village. So that was one of the things that I didn't really account for originally, but actually turned out pretty organic in nature. What I didn't account for, however, was that there would be a lot of space between Bronton, where she met Archek, and where the villagers got upset, and the edge of the forest where there would be theoretically safety. So the problem being here is that if there's an open stretch of land, and these villagers have access to horses and other things, how the heck was she going to get away? So we definitely had to scramble there and figure out some things to make sure that that happened appropriately. Now, on top of that, speaking of Bronton anyways, I didn't account that Emery was going to attempt to calm the villagers down, which seems very obvious in hindsight, right? So we needed to make sure that the villagers got agitated quickly enough that she wasn't going to be able to do that. Now, this does sound like railroading, but keep in mind, this is the first session, and the point of the first session is to rope your characters into something, so that way they've got rails to make decisions within, right? So if they were to, for instance, calm the villagers down and all that, then we might not have had anything happen with Archek. He would have moved off on his own way, and then our character would not have had the information about how to save their brother later on, right? So it's kind of the purpose of the DM in this particular scenario. Now, after we got her roped into with Archek and we managed to get him away from the villagers, a couple more good things happened, right? So we got, like I said, the introduction to magic. We also managed to have Oliver die, right? And with Oliver dying, we weren't exactly sure whether or not Emery, how she was going to respond, right? With Archek and with other groups, I mean, they could have been a death right there and then end of the campaign, right? So I think that went really well. We got to build up some animosity between her and Archek, but force a connection between them because we explained to Emery that she needed him to get to her objective. Now, what we will continue to expand on is why he did what he did, which should make some fun play for future sessions. What else? Well, we did name drop all of the NPCs that were looking to be adversaries in this particular campaign. So we had Ephemeria and we had Rot, and I think that we played them off real well as to having something to be able to pull off, either as some sort of description or just the name itself. In future cases, for instance, we could use some of this information at Holdenford, which is a city with a lot of undead. They might have some experience with Ephemeria, right? So I think that went really well too. One thing that I didn't expect is, thinking about time to Lemoore, which is kind of close to the end destination, and thinking about how many sessions that we had between here and there. We actually had some options to have some sessions between when Archek and Emery fled her village and when they reached Holdenford. So we kind of skipped that, just kind of in the place of things, which normally, if you weren't beholden to some timetable, it wouldn't be a big deal for your campaigns. So, all in all, things went pretty good. Moving on then to our next session. What are some things that we need to think about here? Well, one item is that in order to stay on track with the XP that our character is supposed to have at the start of the next session, she's actually supposed to get 25 XP at the end of that last session. So I gave it to her off screen. I allowed her to kind of decide what she's going to do with it. Seeing as she had a chance to start messing around with her magic, she asked to be able to put some XP into that. And then we're going to spend some time at the start of this next session probably doing some of the magical training montage stuff, which should be fun. We also have to think about, at this point, the agency of Emery is going to open up. Really, it's her world to play with. We gave Sarah an objective of where to go, and at this point, it's up to her to figure out how to get there. She's going to be asking us questions, and then we can kind of fill it in. But we can make kind of two decisions from where she is geographically, and that is, is she going to take a boat, or is she going to go into the or is she going to hike there, right? Because she either needs to go into the town, get a boat, and go there, or go through by walking on the trails, right? So let's just take a look at that quick. So if she goes by foot, we got 14 days to play with between here and there. So just really having some fun things that they can interact with on the road. We've already established the world is a really dangerous place. So for me, there's a couple things that could happen, right? Right out immediately off the top of my head is that they're just going to run into someone on the highway, right? Or on the main thoroughfare. And it could be suspenseful just by you giving very minimal details, right? You see someone coming towards you and they appear to be shambling. Well, now you just build in details from that, and maybe it turns into an undead who's actually a peaceful person, and you can build your world up just from having some of those, right? So traveling on foot over the road, pretty easy to do. Just depends on how quick you want it to do it. Like we said, we've covered a lot of ground. We did 13 days of travel in about 5 minutes earlier. I also have down here potentially finding shelter. It's going to be spending multiple nights on the road, right? So we could have one of those potential people that they stay at being a witch house, and we'll kind of just role play that and go off the seat of our pants right then and there. So I pulled some stats for a couple people that they could run into over the road, and that's really what we need there. I had the idea of maybe them coming across the wounded animal. Sarah mentioned that she had a couple extra health packs. She didn't realize she had extra health potions in her kit, so I figured, hey, you know what's a great way of being able to utilize those? Being able to tend to some sort of woodland animal, maybe a wounded griffin or something like that, which always gives us extra gunpowder if we wanted to rope the animal coming back in way later when she's in the middle of the forest or something like that, right? Some sort of deus machina, we need that in our back pocket. So it really just building up your tools as a GM for later. So fun stuff that you can have right there. But my prediction is that she's probably going to try to rent a boat to cut through that time frame, okay? Now, so what does that all entail? Well, for starters, if she bought a boat and headed down this area, it means that realistically she's going to cut her traffic or her distance to Lemoore way down, right? So by boat, it'll take about 5 to 6 days and then 2 days on foot. By foot, it'll take 14 days total to get to the Lemoore destination. So I didn't want her to take a boat originally because that means that there's no room to make extra quests in between. And I started to think, well, she doesn't have enough money to be able to buy the boat, to be able to afford taking the boat, right? Or we could have some fun with that, right? So if she's got to get a boat, she's got to go to town. If she's going into town, the closest one is Holdenford. It's right next door, right where she is, and there's a lot of room for her to have to investigate with the undead in there. So I figured we can really start playing with this. She has about 83 silver. A trip by boat is probably about 5 silver a day, if I'm not mistaken. No, it's 10 silver a day. So she actually has enough money for herself, but not for her and her companion. Now, we could say that her companion has his money, but I like the idea of her having to do something in town in order to get enough money to take a boat. So we just say, right at the beginning, hey, Archek lost all his stuff when you guys went down the rapids in the Fulcrum Stream to get here, right? So now we already got something that is a hurdle that they need to go over in order to get to the boat, right? At the end of the last session, I mentioned that it was a Twilight day, a day steeped in twilight, and that's special in Holdenford. I kind of just mentioned it kind of just out of the fly, but that made me think, ooh, it's probably dangerous to be roaming around at this point. So we got to do something about that, right? And this is another opportunity for us to add drama and challenge into the game, right? And that's what it's all about, is having those suspenseful moments and encouraging those stronger emotions. So this is one that would happen organically. We don't have to force, like, hey, you're walking down the road and a dragon approaches and goblins and all this stuff. Why are these things randomly attacking you? No, this is something that would happen organically in this world. So on a Twilight day, basically in this area, it means that the undead essentially get to take off their boxing gloves and go ham, right? So there's some rules to it, but essentially, if you're walking around on the streets, you're fair game. But if you're in someone else's roof, under the roof means that you have guest rights protection, and then you're good there. So what we can do is, when Emery goes into the city of Holdenford to look for a boat, we can really play into this. And if she's sitting around the fire at the start of the campaign, and they're really taking a long time to do the magic stuff, and they want to sit there for a couple of days or whatever, then we can have some stuff attack them while they're sitting out there, as long as they're appropriate to the level that they are. So I ended up pulling up some enemies here. We got a goblin shaman who could be like a witch hag stats for if they're going to be staying over the road for some people. We've got a kind of a, I always think the Ferox, based on the description, is like if a vampire was had more of a squirrel suit, right? Kind of a mid-tier entity here. We got some ghouls that could come out and attack. We got skeletons, because you never know what's gonna, if she's gonna proc a fight or something like that in town. So got some good entities here. And then what we did is we just made up a couple of maps quickly. We picked our forest up from there earlier. And so now we got just a couple of ghouls and some sample creatures on it here. And then we picked up, we made a couple of towns, and then we actually gave it this creepy tinged Twilight sort of feel to it. Sorry about that, you gotta let that render in. There we go. So we got this creepy tinged Twilight, eerie blood moon feel, which should be really fun too. So aside from that, I really did think that this next session should be ran mostly theater of the mind. It's probably going to be more investigation, right? So what we want is for, if she goes to town, to have a really engaging experience there. So what we do is we basically just cover some of the things that, what could she find out there? Well, there's opportunities for intrigue. We could talk about, and she could run into some of the dwarves who know more about the onyx, and she could run into some people who know more about ephemeria. So let's build up some information on her and put that in the back pocket. So if she does ask around, we would have nuggets to feed. We also have to introduce the boat captain, right? So if she's going to have a boat, then there's going to be some sort of social thing. She's going to be on that boat for 5 or 6 days with the same people, right? So we can do that. And that is about it. We can maybe think about some issues in Excavandrin, which is along the path that boat would take. So let's just go back to our map real quick. So just thinking about the charted path. If you look here, if she took the boat, she would go take it to the Fulcrum Stream, take that up to the Crystal Tarn, and then down the White Flow. So there's some potential that we could have some shenanigans, but we'll save that for another session. Right now, we really want to think about what's going to happen for tomorrow, for our next session. So moving back to our kind of little flow chart here, we covered what would happen by foot, we covered what would happen by boat. Now we can fill in some of the details of what does Holdenford have to offer. We know it has a lot of spear magic and enchantment magic, but we want to make sure that because we know that she wants to bring her brother back, that she for some reason can't do it in Holdenford, otherwise the campaign's going to end, right? So just kind of keep that in the back nugget, in the back pocket as far as a memory trigger there. So when I started thinking about what she's going to be doing in the Holdenford area, I just started to make a list of different details that you can give, right? So when you're going into town, here's a brief description of the town. Here's what happens when you're going through the gatehouse. So undead soldiers playing with some cards. I've got a character that she can run into who's going to be running to safety. And it's important because it spells out that there's a little bit of danger in this area. As a matter of fact, bring me back up to here, session 2. You got lore here, right? So the Nintonga say, never go to Holdenford on a Twilight day. Her villagers or her people are nearby. Maybe some of that information would have been fed to her already. So that would be one of those options to give her a knowledge people check, just to see if she's got something as far as a tip. That way she doesn't just waltz in and a vampire eats them, right? Then we have, like I said, foreshadowing with some person that she can run into who can explain things, and they can rush to safety together. Then we've got some investigation pieces here, right? So a tavern that's bumping, because the people are going to be trying to get off the streets, right, to have that protection of the guest right. We have someone who's leaving a mouth breather, leaving a door open, so that way suggesting that you can come in, and if she talks to them, he's going to leave the door open and walk away. So if she walks in on her own, she waives her guest right because she's not actually being invited into this space, and it's a private space. So now this guy's actually a predator or something like that, right? So just a couple different ideas that we can use just to make it a little bit extra fun. We've got the Vigor Mortis. They are a group of undead who kind of run this place. So we have a little bit of information on them. We have some details about Ephemeria that they can give her that kind of will feed into the story. And then we have a side quest. So we just mentioned before, how does our character get enough money to pay for the boat? And this was my idea. I thought, you know what? She can talk to the undead. She can talk to these Vigor Mortis, these guys who are running the town, and they can say, hey, you know what? We're having a problem with people, ironically, murdering the undead, right? Or forcibly putting their spirits to peace. And so I basically just strummed up a little side quest here that says, hey, can you help us stop them? I figured, she's someone from the woods. The woods have kind of a domain of their own, so they're nearby. Maybe the guys who are doing this have taken shop up in the woods, and they're dragging people out there and basically killing or consecrating them out there, right? And they've got their own purpose to it. So I had to think of a couple things. It makes sense that the Hounds of Reclamation would work with someone named, a god named Black Phillip, who basically is a goat that eats the dead bodies and the spirits of the deceased to return them to the next cycle of their life, right? So that's the Hounds of Reclamation. That's what they're going to be doing. Now, how do we get our character to go to these people specifically, right? Because it's one thing just to say, hey, there's some people out here that are causing this shenanigans. Well, we've got one tip that Vigor Mortis can give you directly, right? And that is that one of his victims, how do I put it? There was someone as a potential lead that was murdered while he's waiting to be executed. And the reason why that's a problem is because when he was waiting to be executed, he had signed up that he would basically get to become an undead when he died because he had enough clout with the local authorities. Well, someone killed him preemptively to kind of deprive him of that ability. And so now our character and our player can go investigate the prison scene and get further involved with that. And so we just basically figured out how did these Hounds of Reclamation kill, and I think we put his name in here as Nellet. Yep. How did they kill him? And then from there, if our player does go down this route, we can basically go into this for session 3 and plan this a little bit more out and get a combat and a dungeon and stuff like that all figured out. But there's still a potential that Sarah doesn't even go this route. Remember, when we talked about at the start of this, she could just choose to bypass the city entirely and just keep walking. So I'm not going to build a map. I'm not going to get super involved in where these Hounds of Reclamation are really set up and all that stuff. Because we have enough information here to kind of really flush out and have a fun, solid session without going down the rabbit hole on something that she's not ever going to end up doing. So, without further ado, it sounds like we've got enough information here to basically whether or not they go on the road, and then we throw witches and creepy people on the road, and wounded animals, or if they go to the town, we've got intrigue and trying to figure out the culture of what's going on during the Twilight day of this season for Holdenford. We've got plenty of material for our next session. Thanks for joining me at Homebrew here, and I look forward to seeing you for our session 2 of Taking Root.